into setup, they're like, Fontan, piss test. Immediately my heart and my gut sank. Yeah, I smoked a joint before formation because it was working for me. I was going through what would be diagnosed as Gulf War syndrome or Gulf War illness, taking risks. You were taking high-grade risks, and those risks disappeared. And as those risks disappeared, hey, it became more like a natural, agricultural crop. So people still fought us. A lot of the consumer has now got a taste for, and to the alcohol industry's malcontent, they're realizing they're losing a lot of business to cannabis. And so we teach patients to find similar profiles, to have diversity of cannabis, because your body will acclimate to it.
The Grow World community is home to over 23 countries of the biggest commercial cannabis growers in the game. Growers join our community to trial new solutions in their facilities, such as lighting, nutrients, media, and more. So if you own, operate, or work at a commercial cultivation facility anywhere in the world, join the movement for free at growworld.com. We have hundreds of products and services you can trial today. Take your grow to new heights and try before you buy. Here's a quick list of some of our most popular trial campaigns that made this tour possible. When I was putting together the NorCal tour, I had one company in mind, and that was Faven. Born and raised in NorCal, they started selling their under canopy 120 watt LED lights in June of 2023. But do not let that date fool you. These guys are industry vets. They've literally built this industry. They are a dream team of the top commercial growers, manufacturers, and hydro retailers in the game. And as our title sponsor, I can tell you we've been working a lot on preparing an amazing tour in NorCal, and they are so easy to work with. They let the product and quality speak for itself. And just like our team, they're humble. These are real, genuine dudes, heads down, numbers up. And if you give them the opportunity to set up a Faven under canopy lighting trial at your facility, you will not regret it. So check them out. It's the title sponsor of the Grow World NorCal tour. It's Faven. So this is a very surreal moment for me. We finally met right here. Fist bump. You've been mentoring me for how many years now?
4 to 5.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And pretty much an hour every month, rain or shine, whatever country we're in at that time, you have been mentoring me through the rocket ship of business and life and cannabis. And I'm super appreciative of that.
Happy to do so. It was part of my education in cannabis. Was my mentors told me, all right, I'll teach you, kid, but don't forget to pay it forward.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that always stuck with me. You said to a complete stranger, I reached out through a mutual connection, and you always said, hey, the only agreement is one day you'll pay it back. You'll mentor someone, and I definitely plan on doing that.
You'll find yourself in a place where you're finally comfortable and you realize you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, and now you want to make sure that there are stewards to carry it on the same way as it was for me. Because in cannabis, it's very much, and has been, or at least back in the day, was built on trust.
Yeah. And that's where it all started for you.
Yeah, it really did. It started back for me, in '89, when Jack Herrera and his group of merry cannabis misfits basically came to West Virginia University, where I was going to college, and I was playing in a band. I was in a West Virginia Army National Guard unit.
Wow.
And this is before I got activated for Operation Desert Shield / Desert Storm. And I found myself at odds because I was really afraid to go to this rally because I was selling weed.
Yeah.
And as an underground dealer, I was selling south of the border product that was not good quality, but the GI Bill that the Army helps you get through college only covers tuition. So everything else from living expenses, and I was going through as a printmaker, lithographer. So it's very expensive when you look at back then, running a print run, you'd need 50 to 75 sheets to get 25 to 30 prints. So it was very expensive. So I subsidized by selling cannabis so I could have my cannabis as well as, afford the things that I needed. And when the rally was stated, my knee-jerk reaction was, nope, not going to go. And the drummer of my band was very loud and bombastic. Says, nope, fuck no, you're actually going. I'm rolling a bone. I'm rolling us the biggest joint. We're going to go down there and we're going to smoke it with these people. And, I'm like, oh, I'm going to die. I'm going to get arrested. And we went down there, and there's literally 12 of us on the fucking quad. This is 1989. This is a dark time. So everybody was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going there, and Jack spoke and immediately pinned my ears back just because he was a very eloquent yet very bombastic and a great communicator. And he reached out to sell his book, and I grabbed his book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And then I proceeded to go through, they had a little hemp museum, and lady handed me a piece of cloth, and I remember touching it. She says, that's cannabis, that's hemp. And my mind was kind of blown because I had now understood there was a different context for the use of cannabis, not just smoking it. And then, of course, I read the book, basically went to every party talking about it, had a girlfriend break up with me because all you do is go to parties and talk about this marijuana stuff, and I'm sick of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. And, I felt a kinship regardless. Carried on in college doing art, and then I got activated in October of 90 for Operation Desert Shield, where I got pulled out of college, had to say,
Thank you for your service.
thank you for being an American worth fighting for. And I found myself pulled out of college. I had 72 hours to say goodbye to all my friends, family, and write a will.
You were uprooted.
Yeah, completely uprooted. And then I found myself, on the front lines, attached to the French Foreign Legion, because the unit that I joined was one of the more elite artillery units in the United States military. So next thing I know, I'm going through war, and I get injured. I get shipped back to the EU, and while I'm in the EU, completely whacked out on morphine, I talked to the doctor and was like, hey, I went off this morphine. I can't think. I mean, it's great if I want to drool all over myself. I mean, perfect for that. But I couldn't think. I couldn't be creative. I didn't feel inspired, and I knew I had some art in me I wanted to get out after seeing what I had seen in combat. And the doctor was very frank and said, have you tried hashish?
Really?
And I laughed, and he didn't, because I thought he was kidding. And he said, I can't fill it for you. You're gonna have to go find it yourself. And for me, that was the beginning of my journey as a patient, and going into bars, seedy places, underground areas, getting robbed, ripped off, crappy product, sometimes good product, but it was a frustrating reality because you have a medical condition, you can go get the same medicine from any pharmacy, USA, including the world, dosage, etc. Cannabis, not so much. So I found myself as a patient just trying to figure out how to gain access to my medicine. And in time, when I got back, I was reactivated into my National Guard unit. In October of 1992, I was going to get my promotion to sergeant. And on my way into setup, they're like, Fontan, piss test. And immediately my heart and my gut sank. Yeah, I smoked a joint before formation because it was working for me. I was going through what would be diagnosed as Gulf War syndrome or Gulf War illness. I was unfortunately exposed to nuclear, biological, chemical exposure on top of living under the oil fires for an extended period of time. So my immune system was like, fuck you, we're out of here. And I would now have to deal with my body as a 21-year-old basically degrading almost like an AIDS-like syndrome. I could not maintain weight. I wasted weight down to like 90 pounds. I was really getting way too skinny for my own health. So using cannabis, miso soup, I learned that from reading and about the people who survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is using miso soup to clear out your liver.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I didn't either until I read about it, and it saved my life. So I found myself self-treating, and I got tired of making criminals out of my friends. So when my band collapsed in '92, and when I failed my piss test, the next day I went to college, and West Virginia University is like, sorry, you have to go. Your GI Bill's been pulled.
No.
They literally pulled it halfway into my semester. And
because the cannabis
because
piss
one
test
one
went
positive urinalysis for THC. Yep, completely destroyed my career. So I left West Virginia, and friends of mine wanted to go to California to start a band, and I went out there, and unfortunately, a series of unfortunate events. The singer-guitarist developed a heroin habit, and one day I came home and all my stuff was stolen.
Ah, man.
And I was sitting there. I had just grabbed the brand new High Times. I just went by the head shop, and literally the guy just cut it right off the stack. And I sat there, and I remember flipping through this High Times. He left a lamp. So I'm sitting there in the dark in a lamp, and I'm reading through this High Times, really upset. And I'm realizing that every article I'm reading 6 months behind. And I was like, well, that's fucking weird. And I look ahead, and it's next month's issue. So I realized, oh, well, remember, this is pre-internet.
Right.
So this is where I was like, shit's happening now. They're writing about it after the fact. So there's something happening now that I could be a part of. And it's just turned out my best friend and I, Nathan, were going to score some weed up at Haight Street because the guy who was my local dealer, my friend ripped off. And so I go to my dealer, and I got a fucking 45 in my face. And he's like, get the fuck out of here. I'm like, oh, boy, what happened now? He's like, your friend ripped me off, and you're cut off. I'm like, oh, great. So back in the Bay, back in the early 90s, there was a band called the Grateful Dead. And the Grateful Dead still played around. And so there were these people called Deadheads. And the Deadheads love weed and always have great weed. So they were usually posted up on Haight and Ashbury right out front of the Ben & Jerry's. So right before I got hired on to Can, I was working as a ice cream parlor manager. And so I would close that at 10, get out of there by 10:30, run to the North Berkeley BART station, catch the BART to transfer at MacArthur, then MacArthur to San Francisco. Then I would get off at San Francisco, and then I would catch the 72 bus all the way up to Haight Street. And then as soon as you get to Haight and Ashbury, literally jump out, and there is a line of kids
just waiting to get their bag.
The grungiest. I mean, deadheads. And everybody's like, weed, buds, weed. And so I'd walk up, what you got? And it was old school. And how they measured on the streets back in the day was they would put it to their chest, and they'd take the bag, and that was an eighth, that was a quarter, that was 3/4, and that was an ounce. And so they'd lay the bag, and they'd lay their hand, and they'd be like, okay, that's about an ounce. And then, cash exchange. I always had my transfer, so literally I would get off the bus, score my weed within a minute, jump back to the other side of the street, catch the bus going back, catch the train going back to the East Bay, and then literally 2 miles home from there to
And
walk.
what year was that about?
This was 1992. And
Okay.
so that's how I used to score my medical weed. And I, sometimes I'd get home and weigh it. Most of the time it was underweight. Sometimes it was overweight. So you're like, hey, I got a little bit, extra. So, it just depends how things were. So
We are what we eat, and that lends itself to our plants as well. Check out United Nutrients, the nutrient company that partners with blenders that have been in the industry for 40 plus years. Maximizing the grow room. Let's talk about that for a moment. It's super important, especially with limited space. And if you're doing it right and your plants are growing nice and healthy, you don't necessarily have all the most room in the world, right? So that is why you should think about Quest. They have integrated hang points, which allow for easier installation and easy access panels to efficiently service and maintain their machines while they're still hung up from the ceiling. So no uninstall necessary. Check them out.
Cannabis Action Network was an organization that had moved from Kentucky, and that was who was with Jack Herrera back in '89. And so they had moved to the Bay Area, and when I and my friend went up to Haight Street, we saw this building, which is basically said Cannabis Center and Hemporium, and there is the top of the picture is the Statue of Liberty's face, but with pot leaves for the spikes. And I'm like, let's get off this bus. And immediately get off this bus, and we go inside, and I'm like, oh yeah, these guys definitely got to know where to get weed. And we go in there, and they're like, no, we don't have weed. This is all hemp. And it was all like hemp jeans, hemp shirts, and products. And, were we so disappointed. Because we were like, I got to know where to get weed. But the key point was the woman there was Debbie Goldsberry. And she hands me a flyer and says, in 2 weeks, we're going to have our first Cannabis Action Network meeting in the Bay Area. Come on down. So I regretfully fold it, put it in my pocket, go up to, Haight Street, and that's where I figured out where Haight Street was and how to get weed. So, of course, I also bought some bunk LSD that day. Oh, it was water. I was so excited. I had a little tingle on my tongue. I was like, that must be LSD. It wasn't the case, no. But, that's part of buying on the street, right?
Yep.
You get sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I won on the weed side, got really good weed. So I was happy with that. Realized that I started volunteering, started going, and they had their first meeting, and it was Dr. Todd Micarea speaking. Dr. Todd Micarea was the person who wrote the medical marijuana papers, which is basically all the research by the federal government from the 1800s up until the 1960s.
Well,
he was a military psychiatrist, and he was very pro-cannabis and pro-medical cannabis. So when I went to that meeting, I was fucking blown away and was like, all right, I have to know you. And he's like, I don't have a Desert Storm veteran. And back then, I used to have actually open sores on my right foot. I was actually wounded in an area where it was highly contaminated, and I grew blisters on the bottom of my foot for 9 years that would not go away. So he studied that, and he wrote me medical cannabis recommendations, and I was then asked to come volunteer in Cannes to make some phone calls. I was working part-time as a telemarketer, so no problem at all. And I showed up. They asked for a bunch of volunteers. I was the only one to show up. I made the phone calls. They're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. This is 1992. We're going to do an event in spring of 1993 with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies and Rick Doblin, and it's going to be the 50th anniversary of LSD.
You were in the right place.
I was in my home. I basically found myself working the front door for the 50th anniversary of LSD because we would go out and do guerrilla marketing, do radio shows, poster, paste, all the whole 9 yards. And I enjoyed it. I was like, this is my calling. And Cannabis Action Network, we're all volunteers. So they basically came to me in the spring of '93, and we're like, we want to make you a director. Come in, you'll live in our house for free. Whatever we sell, we'll mutually live off of, and we'll get through. And that's how I found myself in the Cannabis Action Network. Found myself traveling around to 47 states, doing rallies, teach-ins, and tours. They like to go to free speech areas on college campuses and just start the discussion.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you can also set up your tables in those areas. And so we would go fishing for new converts and find somebody on their campus. We were the predecessor to Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We just did not have a good follow-up position for when students left the universities, right? So it was one of the things that was great for about a year, for a couple of semesters. Drain. Right. Well, that's the reality is back then we traveled with a folder full of Kinko ready-made copies. And so we would go down to the local Kinkos, make a copy of those masters, and then turn them over to that local person so that they had local information. Again, this is all pre-internet. And the main thing to do was to get information into your pocket so you forgot about it, so that your mom, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, would then find it and then confront you and have that discussion. And so that's the type of grassroots activism we were striving for, because it was the darkest times, and I was able to meet anyone and everyone who was significant along the way in cannabis. Sort of like a Forrest Gump.
You really are.
Of the modern cannabis movement, because I found myself in the right place, the right time, in the right rooms with the right people, and next thing I know, I'm sitting in a room with Jack Herrera, Steve D'Angelo, and others, and they're like, "Here, kid, you roll the joint." And that was the first time I ever had to roll a cone, and I'm sitting there in a room full of legends, and they're all talking like adults, and they're like, "Okay, somebody's got to roll the joint. Oh, you're the new guy? Okay, you roll the joint." And I pulled off an epic, cone, and I didn't realize that until halfway through the joint. Somebody's like, "Hey, by the way, who rolled the joint?" "Yo, you did? Good joint rolling, kid. We're gonna throw our joints your direction." I'm like, "Oh, fuck, great." Just what I need. I just got through the
New
pressure,
job.
and now I got even more pressure. So I found myself as a junior activist amongst a lot of senior activists who therefore took me under the wing and were like, "Okay, you can't say that. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to cause a riot if you say this and do this, and you don't want to get arrested." So I had a great shaping by a lot of guides at different levels over those 2 years. And after that, burnout, and I found myself in a house sitting in between Jack Herrera and Dennis Perone, and it was in Steve D'Angelo's house. And it's a pretty famous photo, and everybody sitting in that photo are all veterans. Jack Herrera was a veteran. Dennis Perone was a veteran. Not only a veteran, combat veteran, survivor of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. The other there was Richard Davis, and then myself, who was a combat veteran. And in that photo, basically, you can see Jack's on one side, Dennis is on the other, and we're kind of sitting on the opposite sides, and they're arguing over who's going to run their next initiative. And that would, therefore, we would convince Jack to stand down, and Dennis Perone would therefore run what would become Proposition 215. So I was literally at the table in the discussion of, because we had already, previous 2 years, part being in Cannes, was we had done Jack's previous initiative. Jack's initiative was like 17 pages long, 52, counties in California, and 17 pages long. It's a lot to read. It called for reparations and all kinds of, tug at the heart stuff, but it wasn't really workable in any way, shape, or form as legislation, where Dennis Perone said, I want to make it really simple, a one-pager. And they did. They made it very simple, very vague, but Proposition 215 would become the first cannabis law in the United States that would send ripples throughout the entire world.
We're
Because
here today because of Prop 215.
you're here in California today because of Proposition 215. And not only that, to those activists that helped get it on the ballot and who gathered the signatures and did all the heavy lifting to get us there. Because once that ripple hit the water, I mean, we're now at 40 plus states currently that allow for medical cannabis. So what that spawned was the first generation of dispensaries, okay? And that was Dennis Perone, Jeff Jones, among others. And so they started in 1996. And in 1997, the federal government came to them and said, okay, you got two choices. You can open up shop this week on this particular date, and if you do, we're going to kick your doors and your heads in. If you close, we're good. They all closed because the weight of the federal government was very hard. And out of that, a brave gentleman, Jim McClellan, who happened to be the, back then, I guess the CFO for Oakland Patients Group, and now out of a job, decided that he needed activists to work with to start one in Berkeley. And so in 99, he started Berkeley Patients Group. And out of that created a space where patients could not only come, but could also self-medicate and be treated like a human being. Well, that struck a chord with me because I had, after 2 years on the road and after Steve watching me negotiate that situation between Jack and Dennis, Steve's like, "What are you doing, kid?" I was like, "I don't know. I just spent 2 years on the road traveling the entire country for free as a volunteer, and I'm broke and I'm burnt out, and I need a place. I need to do something. Yeah, I need some place to land." And he's like, "Hey, I have a hemp company. Back then it was called the North American Hemp Company, and we import and export hemp. You know now where all the hemp stores are because you literally visited them, kid. So why don't you come work for me and sell my hemp wares?" And I was like, "Sure, I think I can do that. But I have a girlfriend. Can she come too? Like, can she sell?" I was like, "She's on the road with me." He's like, "Okay, I know she can sell. So bring her along." So literally after that 2 years, I sat down with Debbie and Ken and was like, "I love you all. I'm burnt out. I need a change." And Steve's offered me a landing spot in D.C. Well, Steve had actually helped sponsor Can and various others. They were successful dealers, and so part of being a highly successful dealer is you put your money toward the movement. You help to make it legal. You don't sit back there and just count your money. You contribute something. And so Steve contributed to NORML, Cannabis Action Network, and many others. But I found myself early in 94 called to a summit in D.C. by a National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. They wanted to have a summit because they were not happy with what we were doing with Cannabis Action Network. We did not realize this at the time, and so I basically go to D.C. This is back when I could stuff an ounce in my crotch. Can't do that anymore. And we basically get to this very shiny, sparkly, meeting room, looks like a board of directors room. And we sit down, and I look around, and it's all white guys. And they're all in suits. And so I have come with my mentor, Debbie Goldsberry. She sits down, and NORML proceeds to just rip us a new ass. Basically just tells us, how dare you guys go out and do grassroots activism and us us suits in D.C. look bad? How dare you take money from our plate? And I am, again, junior 20, I'm like 23 years old, right? So I am sitting here heartbroken because NORML, as far as I was concerned, was the bee's knees regarding cannabis. everything in High Times, which was the magazine at the time, promoted and, postulated them. And now to be sitting there and be written the riot act because we were out doing good activism was beyond confusing and enraging. And Debbie had to sit there and take it, and so did I. And we left there more, motivated than ever to continue to do what we do. But it showed a disconnect for me within the movement between money and activism, doing the right thing versus sustaining a job. And that, to me, also reinvigorated my activism. So I ended up leaving CAN, worked for Ecolution, which that was the North American Hemp Company, changed its name to Ecolution Hemp Company. And so we imported and exported out of Eastern Europe. It was Compote varietal, and then manufactured on, 75 year old machinery that could process 20, 30 foot long stalks. Mm-hmm. Whereas most of the product that comes from China is what's called cottonized, and it's cottonized because it's cut into small bits about the size of a cotton fiber so that it can actually go through their conventional machinery. Because hemp is so strong, as it's long, strong fiber, it will destroy conventional steel and machinery. It requires old school metallurgy to understand. So the machinery that we were working with in Eastern Europe, we were making jeans, hemp jeans, 100% hemp denim jeans. We were the first manufacturers of, and that was a long learning process. It would involve working with the Fashion Institute of Technology, amongst others, because this was a new fiber to work with. So
right.
I worked with, we worked with Adidas. We helped do the first line of the Adidas hemp shoe, of which was used first to use a recycled sole, and then we had to find a safe factory that was paying living wages, which was in Thailand, to actually do that. So Ecolution was also not just about hemp, it was also doing sustainable and doing things correctly, which unfortunately created a product that was a near couture price wholesale when it came into the United States. So it was a high quality product that commanded a high quality price, but it wasn't necessarily to the quality expectation of the American consumer, i.e., hemp is rough. And so Fashion Institute of Technology taught us to use enzyme washes to soften it so that it was more acceptable to the American consumer. It would eventually get that supple if people wash it and wear it, but if you compared a hemp jean direct to a cotton jean, you know what I'm saying? The American consumer is like, okay, I can buy a $25 pair of brand new jeans or a $125 pair of hemp jeans. Okay. Now, the consumer decided, but we had fascinating calls like, hi, we're with skydivers. We jump out of planes for a living, and we just want to let you know that your hemp jeans are the best jeans to jump out of an airplane with. Because a traditional Levi's disintegrates within 4 jumps.
Whoa.
And I'm like, really? That's it? He's like, yeah, absolutely. You jump. You're lucky to get 4 jumps out of a brand new pair of Levi's. The flapping from coming from that amount of feet all the way down to the ground just destroys them. I was dumbfounded. I've been in over 25 jumps in your jeans, and I'm still jumping in your jeans. Huh? So those types of bizarre testimonials to, what we were doing with hemp. We were also importing hemp paper, but of course it was expensive, even though it was tree-free paper, and, done bleach-free. It was still, again, too much for the consumer. And then in the mid-'90s, the entire hemp industry collapsed because Ralph Lauren came. And Ralph Lauren went around and he wanted 2 million meters of fabric to do a run, because that's what you need to do a full run at that level. You need 2 million meters. And China couldn't do it. And so he pulled. And then the entire industry that was starting to build literally collapsed in on itself.
Around 95?
No, this was really around 99. At 98, 99, really, it collapsed. I would say for sure in 97, 98, that's when Ralph Lauren reached out. And when that happened, a lot of the suppliers collapsed. Ecolution collapsed. And I had after 3 years with them on the East Coast, we were out of D.C. and in Falls Church, Virginia. I was like, I can't be here anymore. I got to go back to California. Something about living around D.C. just didn't do it for me. And Steve's like, thank you very much. You took us from literally a 40,000 year company to 3.5 million in sales in 3 years. And I was like, happy to do it. We'll go set up a West Coast office. And back then, my good friend, Todd McCormick, was invited me out for vacation. And when I got out for vacation, he was in Bel Air, and he was living in a castle. And this castle was in between Zsa Zsa Gabor and Leonard Nimoy, with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the other side.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I go there, and of course Jack Carrere comes over. Then next thing I know, Woody Harrelson comes over, and Larry Flint comes over. This is back when they did their movie together, and Todd was growing plants. Literally
in the castle?
In the castle. 4,116 plants are what the DEA found. We had males in the elevator. So when you got in, there were towering males, right? Remember, this is 97.
Okay.
You know, so yeah, he was growing all kinds of varietal. Todd had gone to the Netherlands and brought varietals, and so he was growing out 40 different genes to figure out what worked for him.
Mm-hmm. He was pheno hunting.
Correct. And unfortunately, in that year of 97, someone ratted him out, and in the time that I was hanging out with him on my vacation, I was like, I want to learn how to grow pot. Can I come out here and grow pot with you? He's like, yeah, you can come out here and grow pot with me. You're cool. I'm like, yeah! And so my wife and I excitedly, back then I got married at the High Times Cannabis Cup back in 95. So my wife and I were, she's now my ex-wife. So Rachel and I tried to figure out what we were doing and decided, okay, we'll quit Ecolution. We'll leave the East Coast, we'll move to the West Coast, and we'll just see what happens with Todd.
Just grow some weed with Todd.
Correct, and see what happens. And I come back, tell Steve bye, and then the 3 days before I'm supposed to leave, I've got all my stuff packed up, and I get a call at 6:30 in the morning, and it's my secretary at Ecolution. She's like, Etienne? I was like, yeah. It's like, you have a friend, right? Yeah. Named Todd, right? Oh, yeah. In Bel Air? Yeah. I have got some bad news for you. And that's how I found out Todd got busted for 4,116 plants. And next thing you know...
That's a lot of plants at that time.
Yes. Yes, I will not deny that fact. And I loved every one of those plants. And... my wife and I still moved out, and when we got there, it was apocalyptic. You know,
the DEA just
they had cut the lights and dropped them in the ballasts in the water, and you know, the dickish things that they did to make sure to really grind it into you.
Yeah.
You know, they really want to make an example to your soul so that you don't attempt to even think about that. So that was the cruelty that was the norm at the time. And Todd had done everything to spec. The fire department came through and was like, kid, thank you. He did everything to code and proper.
Wow.
So
he was just before his time.
He was ahead of his time. Yeah. And he got ratted out by friends. And that would unfortunately put him through hell and us through hell as well. So my wife and I were basically, Ecolution basically went under, didn't call us. Basically, the check stopped. I called, they're like, sold the company, sorry, bye. But, oh. So I would then go on to work for Galaxy Gallery. It turns out my roommate at the time owned the largest glass gallery in LA on Melrose. And it was not only sold all high-end pipes, half of it was an actual art gallery. So we'd have Olivia, other artists just display their arts for sale, and have full-on art shows. So back then, Galaxy Gallery, actually 2000 BC in 1998, won the right for people to say bong in a bong shop. Before it was a water pipe. You could only buy it for tobacco use only. But since the law had changed in 1996 for medical marijuana, they felt that they should have the right. So that head shop up the street from SNLA literally took it to court and won the right for you to say bong in an actual head shop. So you can now say it, a water pipe, bong, smoke marijuana out of it. But back then, yeah, you couldn't. It was verboten. And if you said so, you were asked to leave.
Wow.
I mean, the first time I bought my first bong was in '89. We had to go I was in Morgantown, West Virginia. We had to go up to Pittsburgh to a T-shirt shop, and you had to wait for everyone to leave in the T-shirt shops, and then you would ask, "Can I see you?" It was a Sikh family, and you would then ask, "Can I see your water pipes?" They would go lock the front door, take you to the side room, and then unlock this door and open it up. And it was basically a closet. And there was just like 6 bongs. They were all graphics. So you had like the half footer, the 1 footer, the 6 footer, and like a 3 footer or whatever. And, the choices was either purple or black or red. You know what I'm saying? And that was it. And depending on the size, there was only one size, one color. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I bought my first bong back in. And I remember that was like $120. You're like, oh, that was so much money. But we had an authentic graphics bong. But you couldn't say, I mean, even back then, as I stated. So working at the Galaxy Gallery in LA, basically I was hanging around a lot of celebrities again and finding myself in unique parties and situations. And I was then turned on to the first isolator. Okay, if you're familiar with, in 1998, 99, there was a product finally made it on board called the isolator, ICEO-lator. And it was basically a 5-gallon bucket with a clear membrane on the outside and then a screen on the bottom that then tiered down to about a 1-inch pipe that would then feed into a glass bottle. And so you would then take your cannabis, put it in with ice and water, and then the lid had holes for you to put in the blender, to put a blender on top to kind of agitate. And what you would do is you would then agitate the cannabis through the water, and so the cannabis would then be all shaken, and then all of a sudden, that screen on the bottom that was sealed, these little trichomes would start to come through. And they would come through, and they would all fall straight down and go into that glass container. So we had the first one at the Galaxy Gallery, and I was like,
That's an interesting technology, yeah.
I'm going to buy this because the hash that I had seen from it was a quality I had not ever had before. I had seen or heard of black bubbling hash. Yeah, good fucking luck finding it on the street. And now I was creating it. And next thing I know, all my friends and everybody who was attached to the Galaxy Galleries, whose friends had any type of leaf or vegetable matter, were finding me and were like, I need you to make this into hash. And then I was like, okay, well, I get 10%. Of whatever I produce. Okay, sure, no problem, because they were happy to get full melt hash. And so next thing I know, I found myself just being a hash maker, after, learning how to grow on the side and now making the first water hash through the first commercially available machine. And 99, found myself, my ex-wife and I, we basically had reached our point in our lives where we had to move on. And fortunately, my friend Russ, who was the owner of the Galaxy Gallery, said, I know Etienne. I don't know who the fuck you are. You got to go. Your head's fucked up. You got to go get your head straight. And I am forever in debt to Russ Kress for saying that, because I would then say to my ex-wife, goodbye. and you can have everything. And literally walked away on April 30th, 1999 with nothing but the clothes on my back and $100.
Wow. You
And
started
and a
all
love
over.
seat.
And a love
Well,
seat.
the love seat was because one of my old mentors in Cannes became my roommate, and his girlfriend back then was Debbie, and he had her love seat, and he took off and forgot it. And I called Debbie and was like, I'm heartbroken. I got nothing. I got nowhere to go. She's like, well, come stay with me. I have a spare bedroom. Did he leave a love seat? I was like, yes, he did. And so there I am driving up from LA in a U-Haul, the smallest U-Haul I can get, with literally a bag of clothes and a fucking love seat, black love seat. And I arrived with literally nothing but nothing on my back. And Debbie's like, stay with me. You'll find work. And next thing I know, all my friends who were in Cannes were all either running dispensaries or large grows for dispensaries.
And this is around Berkeley.
This is Berkeley, Oakland,
Berkeley,
San
Oakland,
Francisco.
okay.
So I basically found myself coming back into my friends who were in Cannes had now all become heavyweights in the cannabis world in the Bay Area. So because no one knew who I was, they wanted to keep me underground in their grows. So basically I became that guy who came out of nowhere that all of a sudden everybody saw, but nobody knew who I was. I'd be coming through the dispensary and go into a secret room and go downstairs and work in the grow in Oakland underground. So I would then go work in literally right next to the Oakland Coliseum. The right entrance right there, right next to the track, was an industrial grow for Richard Lee, who did Oaksterdam. And so he named his grow rooms Tom, Dick, and Harry, all after the Freedom Tunnels in The Great Escape.
Wow.
And so he'd be like, we're trimming in Dick tonight, and then we got to prep Dick for, all that. And then, Tom, you got to change all the water. So this is, again, we were running, this is before Dosatron, so we were basically running 4x8 tables, 2,000 watt HPSs, and 100-gallon reservoirs, right? So you got to rotate those out every 7 to 10 days because your nutrients in the water just gets funky. And, we oxygenate and put all kinds of bubblers and stuff, so we learned how, I had friends of mine that were pulling down 3 pounds a light.
Damn.
Because we were growing that Oaksterdam method, which was 72 to 144 plants in a 4x8 area, putting them immediately into flower, so it doesn't matter what you have, it's going immediately into, nice, stock production, etc. And so we were able to then isolate certain genetics, mostly Dutch genetics, that were able to take 3,000 ppms worth of really Herculeanly get them going and have high quality product that would undercut the market, because the problem was people were still paying $4,000, $6,000 a pound back then for cannabis. So
that's wild to think about. $6K a pound.
Why? Why? Well, because people were taking risks. You were taking high-grade risks, and those risks disappeared. Now, as those risks disappeared, it became more like a natural, agricultural crop. So people still fought us, but we were able to, and thankfully, as I talked about, the creator of Berkeley Patients Group was also a master grower. And so he had a place called the Glove Building that was just churning out cannabis. So I ended up working for that, and then he ended up unfortunately passing away in 2001. He had HIV and due to complications passed away. And
what was his name?
Jim McClellan. And the other business partners were Debbie Goldsberry and Donald Duncan. And basically, Don and Debbie came to me while I was working for Ed Rosenthal. Ed Rosenthal is one of the most successful authors in cannabis, self-published authors, success over the decades. So I found myself, after working for my other friends, he basically is like, I want you to oversee my grows. I want you exclusively. So I found myself overseeing his clone production, and we were pumping out 5,000 clones a week.
Ooh.
So that was making
underground.
Yeah, 7,500 to get that 5,000 out the door, and we delivered all those clones to all the dispensaries in the Bay Area. So I learned early and often how providers were treated, which is not very respectfully, unfortunately, and I created an atmosphere. Well, from that, I created at Berkeley Patients Group an atmosphere that I wanted, because Berkeley Patients Group came to me and were like, okay, we have a grow and we want you to run it. And I'm like, fine. I left Ed, I go to the grow, and the grow is in the middle of San Francisco, and basically it's a white powdery mildew factory. There's just too much. The fog goes directly over.
It's Christmas time.
It's just no matter what we grew there, and I basically came to them and said, there's nothing I can do to stop, and there's no way I can pump out non-infected product out of this building. And so they're like, fudge. And next thing I know, they're like, okay, well, come work for BPG then. And so I came to work for BPG, started off in the weigh room, which was weighing out the eighths, grams, and ounces. And then next thing I know, I was the manager. I was overseeing the dispensary. Next thing I know, I was the buyer. Because I was a grower, and so I knew what I was looking at. And because Jim and others had grown cannabis, that was high grade, and so they were selling it to the dispensaries for around $3,200 a pound. And so when somebody would come in and say, oh, I want $4,500 for this, and I'd be like, okay, well, here's what I have, and it's sexy product, right? Mm-hmm. And then I have what theirs, which isn't. And I'm like, okay, now you tell me I'm getting 32 for this, and you want 45 for this, why do you think yours is worth it? And then sit back and watch them squirm. And then they eventually are like, okay. Over time, we were able to negotiate prices. And then there was a time when we then decided to start testing, which was back in 07 and 08.
For pesticides?
Well, I basically bought some cannabis, and I was smoking it, and I got an upper respiratory infection. At that time, we were doing what's called organoleptic testing, which is visual, using microscopes and everything. And so we thought we were sound in our methods and methodologies. And next thing I know, I'm sick, which basically I was able to find some botrytis in there that had slipped through. And I realized, well, if I get sick, because I have a disease called, like I said, Gulf War illness. And so I have a sensitivity, well, my body has a sensitivity to things. So I realized that my cancer and AIDS patients, I could kill them, unfortunately, if they had ingested that type of product. So I realized, due to the limitations of what we had, that we now had to engage science. And that's when I contacted the University of Mississippi and the Research Triangle and said, we would like your testing standards for gas chromatographs. And Dr. El Soli is like, fuck off. So
he told you to fuck off.
In so many words,
And what year was that?
That was 2007.
Okay.
And so I reached out to others, Ethan Russo and others, and said, hi, I'm Etienne. I'm with Berkeley Patients Group. You may know who you are. And he's like, oh, we know who you are. I was like, I want to figure out science for testing. How do I do this? And they pointed me to the Netherlands. And that's where I was able to find Dr. Arno Hazekamp, who was the Bedrocan scientist and also in charge of making the testing solutions. Now, why do testing solutions matter? Testing solutions are what labs can take in and test. You cannot put raw cannabis in a laboratory. If you do so, it is a $10,000 fine per test. So, to get around taking cannabis and putting it into a laboratory, we had to figure out a way how to create a suspended solution. And so we tried various different types of liquids for finalizing on 100% alcohol. And so Dr. Hazekamp would show us how to take a kilo and take a representative sample from that kilo, and then we would put it in a hand grinder for a certain amount of time. Then we would put it into usually it was a plastic container, add in the 100% alcohol, put a screw top, agitate it for 1 minute, and then from there, set it down and take a pipette, and then pop it open, use that pipette to pull out enough liquid to fill a vial. And then you fill that vial, and then you have suspended cannabinoids and everything that's in that cannabis. And so that, therefore, could go to a testing lab. So I started originally working with a couple of guys, which would then be Addison Demura and David, I forget his last name. And they basically started a company called Steep Hill Laboratory.
Wow.
And
I'm familiar with their work.
Well, this doesn't start off that well for them, unfortunately, because they were originally in their apartment, and I got my samples back, and it had dog hair in it. They have a dog, and apparently the dog roamed around, etc. So
we all have our starts.
We all have our starts, and so that was my first time firing them. And when I then found another company, I will protect their name. They basically were doing overrun testing for Bayer and Novartis and other Gemtech companies that are in Berkeley and the Bay Area. So they basically deal in live tissue of humans from liver, brain, et cetera, et cetera. So they not only had gas chromatograph, they had UV-HPLC machines. For those who are watching, a gas chromatograph basically burns up a sample and gives you everything that has off-gassed. Of course, the THCA turns to THC, etc. Whereas the UV-HPLC machine uses ultraviolet and chemicals to basically disintegrate the cannabis completely and dissolves it and then tells you everything it has dissolved in that sample. So the difference is one's a $100,000 machine, the gas chromatograph. The UV-HPLC is about three-quarters, probably $1 million now per machine. So this company I was working with had 3 gas chromatographs and 6 UV-HPLC machines. So I brought Dr. Hazekamp over, and he worked with the laboratory, and in 2008, we isolated THC finally. We had finally figured out a way to consistently gauge THC. Shortly after that, for every 1,000 samples, we started to find a secondary spike. And after others referencing Dr. Meshulam's work, we found that that was CBD. So we figured out the basics that we needed to test. Then from there, we started doing what's called plate testing, where they're actually pulling molds and mildews and basically smearing them on a plate, or doing the same thing with the cannabis samples to see if there's any molds or mildews that are growing. And so we started the original certifying of our cannabis, not only the THC percentage, but then starting to understand the other molds and mildews issues. So we basically spent over $1 million of our own money at BPG just certifying the science and doing over 1,500 tests. And then in 2008, 2009, we were trying to now figure out there's something happening here that we have to quantify and figure out, because if we don't, we release it to the public, we're screwed. Because it was the fear that if THC percentage gets out, then the problem was going to be that people were going to think that potentially along the causation of alcohol, that the higher potency meant the better, more bang for your buck cannabis. And we learned through our testing, even though that all the cannabis samples that we had were very similar in chemotype, but the difference was the terpenes and all the essences. And of course, now we now know those as, the whole industry that it is. And now we're starting to realize all those flavonoids and everything that are inherent all have its place in cannabis. So unfortunately, back then, my competition, Steve D'Angelo, came back to California, and he started a company called Harborside. And he wanted to, back then, he was then working with Steep Hill and financing them. And so he wanted to be the first out with testing. And so he did. And unfortunately, he released Pandora's box before we could ethically figure out to understand what we now know in 2024 is that, all these terpenes and flavonoids and everything that's on the plant all have their play in the high. Some work on modulating, some
effects.
don't. All the ensemble effect, and I use that terminology, ensemble effect, because it's originally called the entourage effect, which was coined by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. And I wrote to him after talking to Dr. Lester Grinspoon and others, because after I became an expert, I spoke with and have become friends. On top of that, I'm actually published in Dr. Lester Grinspoon's book back in 1996 under Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine. I'm PTSD. So I've been talking with him since the 90s, and rest his soul. I engaged him. I was like, we have a problem with nomenclature here. If we take the term, entourage, and when you look it up, it basically means the person that brings others to the party. Okay? Whereas I didn't feel that nomenclature fit with cannabis. It wasn't just THC. It's everything together. And so in talking with Dr. Grinspoon, I said it's more of an ensemble, right? Whereas, you can pick out the viola, the violin, the cello, the strings, and then here comes the orchestra and everything that comes with it, the brass, the horns, etc. So there's so much happening initially because of science. We thought it was all just THC, and including the finder of THC himself, felt that way. And I wrote to him via LinkedIn, oddly enough, and was like, Dr. Mechoulam, I gave him the definitions of both, the standard dictionary of, what an entourage and then ensemble. And he disagreed with me and felt that, his terminology was fine enough, whereas Dr. Grinspoon and others adopted my terminology because it fit better, because it wasn't just THC. Now we discuss THC, CBD, and various other, flavonoids, terpenes, diterpenes, etc., that all have their right on the effect. So, lot to do with putting change into place that had to be done ethically and correctly. I've always felt an integrity litmus to cannabis that I did my best and have done my best to maintain, in the sense that when it came to testing, when people failed, I couldn't keep that cannabis. They would then take it and sell it elsewhere unethically, knowing it had failed.
And you wouldn't sell it. You wouldn't bring that to your patients.
No. I had enough deaths on my conscience for more. I don't need any more from
medicine,
my negligence.
Yeah.
Or my people's negligence, because I felt a responsibility as a medical provider to provide quality medicine. Not only that, the highest standard quality medicine. And then, fortunately, the city, through its own cases, basically made law that everybody then had to test. So then all the Berkeley dispensaries had to test. So you couldn't just do that. Then they would just take it to Oakland or, other places and sell their cannabis, unfortunately, because there was a lot of unethical people and they just wanted to make their money. So I constantly built the standards at BPG on how to treat people and how to treat patients. And we brought everybody in for free to come, look how we do things, and then take this back to where you are. Our mentality goes back to the Dutch mentality of sitting there amongst coffee shops, right? The coffee shops originally were individuals, but they realized that they could hang separately or they could unionize together and lobby for all the same things, same talking points, same laws, same taxation, etc. And we saw strength in their solidarity. And so early on, Berkeley Patients Group and the other dispensaries in Berkeley, we all got together weekly and discussed things because we all had the same problem patients, etc., and how to address problems and situations. We also have given away free cannabis for 25 years because we know the cost of cannabis is too high. It costs way too much. And so we have always been charitable giving. So we have been giving away free cannabis to about 250, 300 patients a week since then.
For 25 years.
It's the right thing to do because you
It
don't
is.
know.
If you can afford it, if you can afford to
Correct.
do that.
If you can afford it, and many people can. But congratulations, you just found out you've got stage 4 cancer. And now your life has changed, and now you have to go find your medicine in a place that you don't know. And this is a problem because cannabis is completely subjective. And every patient comes in and he's like, oh, well, I've got migraines. What's the migraine cannabis? And this is where we have to tell them that doesn't exist. We wish it did, and maybe in science and time there'll be science and formulations for that, but you and I can have the same medical condition, and what works for you won't work for me. What works for me won't work for you. Not always the case. So this is what we had to teach people, and then to therefore then document, because again, all this cannabis are funny names, and now you've got thousands of varietals of funny names. And people have now come to understand terpenes and terpene profiles, chemovar profiles. And one of the things that we're teaching people now, due to the science that's available to us, is to find, when you find and isolate what works for you, is to then find out what that profile is so that you can then shop for those times when that isn't around.
Based upon
those profiles, so you can find something that works for you. And we also recommend, having varieties, because if you use the same cannabis for 30 days, you acclimate to it. So having diversity to your medicine is key as well, because one of the first things I learned in Psychology 101 was regarding cannabis and your cognitive ability. And this was in 1989, right? My freshman year of college. And basically, if your cognitive level is a straight line, okay, your first day of doing cannabis, your cognitive level drops. And the first 7 to 10 days drops to its lowest form about day 9, day 10. Then slowly after, it tapers up. Tapers up, tapers up, and after 30 days, you're at your original cognitive level line. So that's where, and people don't understand, it's like, well, I grew this one plant and I've smoked it, but I just don't get as high off of it as I used to. That's the reason why. Your body is acclimated to that genetic. And so we teach patients to find similar profiles, to have diversity of cannabis, because your body will acclimate to it. So these are things that I'm a patient and a grower and a provider. So these are things that I've understood as a patient, and one that I have heard from the feedback of my patients all over the decades as they try to understand how their medicine works for them symbiotically within their lives and lifestyle. And, providing free cannabis is something that we always found ethically correct to do. And even when the law changed in 2018 or 2016, we still bought cannabis and provided it free to patients until this year SB 34 will expire on January 1, and then it'll become AB 2555, which is a bill that allows us to give away free cannabis through cannabis distribution centers to low-income people.
That's incredible.
So this is due to hard work and many of us activists throughout the state of California. And so we are one of the few states that actually does free giving. And so we're trying to inspire other states to follow suit and understand the sheer cost of cannabis. Now, of course, the costs are coming down, right? But it is still very expensive for people to afford outright. So part of now the law is to give away free cannabis and to have it tested. And I am proud to have left those as legacies, because eventually we as dispensaries are going to disappear. There will be a day you'll be able to get your Costco ounces in low, mid, and high, and that's just how it's going to be. Now, whether it'll be, U.S. grown, state grown, we're still dealing with interstate commerce. Then, of course, we're dealing with potentially international commerce. I mean, since December of 2020, my friends helped change international law and made cannabis legal worldwide. So now you've got companies like Uruguay, Israel,
Is that through your work
Netherlands.
at the United Nations?
No, my work at the United Nations came later, but my friends work at the United Nations, and I've changed these. And those are my mentors who I'm working with specifically to change international law by 2030 to stop, basically make it legal, and it would also stop executions. Last year, while we were at the UN, there were 3 people in Singapore executed for just discussing a deal.
Wow.
Just discussing a deal.
They
didn't even
killed.
touch the cannabis. They were executed. So we can't sit by morally as activists.
No.
We can't stop. So I escalated from the local to the state level, and as you see by the funny hat that I'm wearing, I am part of an organization I created called the Veterans Action Council, which is a group of veterans which are all stars in cannabis from all over the United States. And we got together as a buddy check during COVID, and we decided that we wanted to stop the suicides because we were worried, there was back then the 22 a day. It can be as high as 40-something a day. Suicides per day of service members. We've lost more service members, unfortunately, to suicides than we have to wars. And we don't have good mental health. And we have found cannabis and psychedelics, or I have found cannabis and psychedelics to be very helpful in my transition to civilian life. It's, killing people's a rush. Nobody wants to talk about it, but as military people, it becomes a rush. And people get addicted to that rush. And those people are those people that go and volunteer and did 6 tours, 7 tours overseas because they get what's called a bloodlust. But those of us who don't enjoy that, we still have to deal with the repercussions of what we saw in war and in combat. And the stories I have are ugly, and none of your people want to hear or understand them. But I've seen the worst that man can do, and that's why I've worked to try to do the best that we can do. And I've worked to try to undo the evil that I participated in, which I feel and still feel was a war over oil. Leave the world in a much better place. And so I have grown hundreds of tons of cannabis as hemp and sold it as finished product. I've sold hundreds of thousands of tons of cannabis over the past 25 years as a legal medical provider. And I'm just thankful for the opportunities and the chances and the risks. 25 years ago, we hired only activists because every day we're expecting to walk away in matching bracelets and go away for a long time. The forethought that Jim McClellan, Don, and Debbie had in Berkeley Patients Group was even in the name. Now, why does that matter? Why does the name matter? We have to understand, back then there was no self-defense or medical defense for cannabis allowed in federal court. So they took the genius decision to put patients in the name so that every time if we went to jail, we went to court, 12 of my peers, plus 2 or 3 extra, would hear the name patients every single time it was read. And that was our defense. That was it. That's the best we could come up with. That was the concept, was to go to jail and fight it through the courts. I'm a soldier. I have been to death's door and back. And part of being in the military and being in combat is you kind of become fearless. You lose that fear. I mean, like you were afraid of certain things, but you realize that what you wanted was on the other side of that fear. And that was your toll, right? And when you originally reached out and spoke to me, I heard your passion. I saw what you were doing with, can I say your previous business?
Yeah.
Can of Cribs, and what you did. And I coached you through your year of silence. You had to actually sign one of those non-disclosure agreements where you had to shut your mouth and not say anything, but you sat back and you wood shopped and you figured out your plan. You laid out what you're doing, and we worked through it. You saw it, you envisioned it, you ideated it, and you created it. And you're on the other side of it. That's the same way in what we did every day by showing up. Today could be our first day or our last day there, right? But it was also for my patients. My patients were sick and dying. So today could be their first day or their last day. So I taught my people to treat them with the same respect. Why? Because I had gone and I had to go through the VA because of my wasting syndrome and because of my disabilities, because of my Gulf War syndrome. They broke me, they fixed me. Breaky fixy. So when I would go and discuss my cannabis at the VA, they would basically stop and say, okay, you are now what's known as a known drug user because you told us about your drug use. And so therefore, we're going to stop your services and we're calling security. You have to leave now. 4 different VA facilities I was physically removed from. Oakland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., just for talking about my medical cannabis. So I was made to feel like a second-class citizen. I was made to feel shameful. Here's the kicker. Oh, this is. You want a little story? All right. So I just get physically escorted, one guy on each arm, out of the Washington, D.C. VA. I am mad, livid, pissed. Expected it, but I had a friend that was a Vietnam veteran. I had traded him weed for Marinol, and I had tried Marinol, and I wanted it for travel. And so I went in and basically told the VA I want Marinol. And they're like, you get the fuck out. And as I'm walking outside, I smell pot. And I'm like, whoa. No fucking way. And I walk around, and I come around the back of the building, and there's a guy in a wheelchair looking fucking rough, and there's a nurse. And I'm like, I smell marijuana. And she's like, yeah, he's going through his chemotherapy. And you ever hear your brain break? Yeah, that was one of those moments where I was just like, you just kicked me out of here for this, and here's a guy out back smoking it? That's wrong.
Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. So this is why when I was at Berkeley Patients Group, I shaped it around not being in that type of negative situation. And so we have seen the laws change. We have now have it legal in California, or as close to what they think is legalization. We have a complete misunderstanding about what the understanding of high quality cannabis is. You know, people are always asking, oh, what's wrong with California cannabis? Why is the California cannabis industry collapsing? You want to know?
A lot of reasons. I would imagine over-regulation being one of them, over-taxation.
The Department of Cannabis Control does not smoke cannabis. They don't understand cannabis. They haven't grown it, they haven't used it, and they came from the ABC world. I'm just going to run through this as quick as I can. So back prior to 2018, before they cut off local access and local purchasing, I was able to purchase for the first 18 years directly from all small batch farmers, all high grade, usually 3 to 5 kilos max, okay? And I would then intake that cannabis. We had to then go from paying cash from the barrelhead to then convincing you to give me your weed.
Right.
I'm going to take this weed and I'm going to put it aside, and you're going to come back and see me in 3 weeks. Why? Because in that 3 weeks, I'm going to have that cannabis plate tested, which takes 72 hours. There is a 24-hour test, but that's only available mostly to hospitals, and nobody wants to spend that kind of money, so everybody does a 72-hour plate test. So I get the plate test, and that tells me to go to the potency test. I get the green light there that there's no molds and mildews, because anything that is smeared on those plates within 72 hours, if it's bad, it will figuratively grow, and can be physically seen. And if anything is physically seen, it failed. And they tell me what it is, and I go back and tell the grower, you failed because of this thing. And they're like, And then they go fix that thing, and then they come back and sell me their cannabis. So we were reliant heavily on teaching our growers to be better. So because I was a grower, they would always come in to me and they would be like, okay, here's my bud, okay? They're always like an expectant child, tell me what you think, because I became a kind of a prognosticator. Once you've seen enough dried pot, you can literally look at it and say, oh, hairs are long, brackets are small, the temperature was high. You were over 85 degrees, right? How did you know that? The plant's telling me that. That plant's telling me that right here. And so I learned all the problems, what they visually are, and then could convey that to the grower and tell them, go fix that, and then you can come back and sell me your cannabis. And then it will be at the price that you want it at, not at the price you expect it to be. And being firm but fair with them. And we would then send that off to then potency testing. And so then it would come back with THC and if it had any CBD, et cetera. THCA and CBDA and THC and CBD. So then I would get those numbers. Once those were in the clear, then I would take whatever that is and then have it made into eighths, grams, ounces based off a formula. And then it's taken down to the floor, sold out. Now remember, this cannabis came to me fresh, usually sits as long as 3 weeks, is then packaged, and then sent out the door. Those 3 to 5 kilos gone in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Okay, word of mouth spreads, and on top of that, people just know where to get good, high quality grade cannabis. Now, since 2018, what we have is a lot of growers growing large scale. Okay, and the problem is they're growing large scale, a lot of mid-grade. And the problem that the DCC thinks is they think that cannabis is this bottle of water. Now, this bottle of water can sit on the shelf for a year. It doesn't change, right? Well, the problem with cannabis, and you see water here and you see oxygen here. Now, imagine if this is cannabis, that's oxygen. Well, what is cannabis susceptible to? Oxygen, light, and heat, right? So you've trapped cannabis, a lot of it on the wall in jars with oxygen, okay? Oxygen basically is oxidizing and degrading. You can look under a microscope. It turns red. It oxidizes. It's literally rusting. And you've got cannabis that I receive that's 6, 9 months old sometimes. And then it changes every 3 months chemically due to the oxygen that's trapped in that actual bottle. And that's a problem because now the consumer, the California consumer, very educated consumer, very used to high terpene rich cannabis, is all of a sudden getting very stale weed, right? Doesn't taste as good. Why? It's the same thing. You had friends or yourself, you've actually taken cannabis, put it in a bag, or you had a bunch of it, so you threw it in a closet and you come back, the smell's gone. What's happened? It's called anaerobic decomposition. It's oxygen inside is basically eating the crystals. It's all off-gassed. The plant has to be treated at the same temperature from the grow room it was grown in. So if it was in that temperature, it has to maintain that temperature colder all the way till it's received by you and you walk out the door with it. That's how it should be. But the problem is, right, oxygen. 2, most of the cannabis comes in jars and other things, so that's light's a problem. So you've got light, heat. You've also got these large-scale producers producing, 12, 50 kilos, and then putting them all into these huge bags. So you're mistreating the product at the production facility. You're not keeping a refrigeration consideration through the entire process at all, which it should be. Do you prefer fresh broccoli, or would you like your broccoli 3 months old? It's no different. It's a fresh product. You should be getting it as fresh as product. Right. Okay. So how can we defeat this problem? Well, you can industrially defeat this problem. Okay. And it requires science. But that science isn't that hard. So what it requires is, if you are going to leave that much space or however much space within, you need to do exactly the same thing they did with coffee, right? And which is purge the oxygen and replace it with an inert gas. Okay, their choice gas is nitrogen. Right. So basically what happens is, if this were coffee or etc., it goes through, and right as the product is put in, right before this seal goes on, a puff of air goes in that pushes out the oxygen, and then it's immediately sealed. Okay, so for cannabis, it requires, the science originally was 80% nitrogen, 20% CO2. But as this cannabis degrades over time, it turns to CO2. So that's why it has been changed to 20% argon gas. It's heavy gas, so it's heavier than air. So again, between that and the oxygen, you would basically have a shelf-stable product, because that oxygen is no longer eating it. So they don't understand the basic chemistry that's happening, much less the basic science. And because they are not going to require refrigeration all the way through the process, which it should be. I mean, if beer is that way, it should be no different for cannabis, in my opinion, and many other educated people's opinion around the world. But unless you're going to shelf stabilize the product, it has to go to the consumer as quickly as possible. And that is challenging as these large-scale producers come online. So science can defeat this, because, of course, it has to be a sealed product in the end. But that, I think, is the basic conundrum of California cannabis, is the non-understanding of quality, much less how to maintain the quality control throughout. If it were, we would not be having this discussion.
Yeah. Well, you have taught me a lot today. You have been mentoring me for 5+ years, but the new stories and everything that you've taught me today, I am, as always, super appreciative of. I know we have a lot of future markets that are evolving. We're going to be going to Spain, Portugal, Germany, Thailand, etc. So everything that you did for the patients, everything that you're doing for the patients and veterans, you are also advising countries all around the world. So from myself and everyone at Grow World, we just want to say thank you, and kind of, in closing here, for everything that you're doing for us, for our plant, for our community, and for the future of cannabis.
Thank you. Humbly and honestly, it's been a labor of love. I died on the battlefield, and so I kind of came back to life and realized that I had an opportunity to do something and leave the world a better place. And so this has just been my way to do so. So internationally, I'm working with friends of mine at the international level. I'm a part of the Cannabis Embassy, which is a non-land-holding country. It is along the same lines as Malta. Malta is a similar thing. They do not have actually land, but they have representation at the United Nations.
Right.
Currently, I am part of what's called a non-governmental organization, of which we go behind the scenes and lobby various countries and advise them on laws, suggestions. We also hold what's called side events, which are UN-sanctioned educational events where we take people from around the world and educate them on cannabis, specifically walking them through medical all the way through. Now currently we're working towards 2029, 2030, so that, as I stated before, no one will be executed for cannabis, and then it will be legal worldwide. So that export, import will be available realities to everybody. And I look forward to the time where we can import natural land races from Thailand, Colombia, also from the EU. But I myself, I'm looking forward to the African varietals. I love Swazi. My first grow in '89 was Durban Poison. Yes,
Wow.
Durban Poison. And it grew straight through the closet. Yeah, did not know what I was
Tough.
doing or lice or photo periods. And back then, I had to drive a state away because that's when Operation Green Merchant had gone down. And Operation Green Merchant, for those who aren't aware, the DEA decided to stake out all the hydroponic stores all around the United States. And anybody who bought anything, they wrote and put anything in your car, they wrote down your license plate, followed you home or wherever you were, and they busted all kinds of people. So when I was in college in West Virginia, my friend and I literally drove to Columbus, Ohio, and parked 2 blocks away, to then, go buy, a simple 400 HPS, which is, nothing nowadays. But that was the reality of, the dark days. And you had to be brave. You had to be very brave and stupid, I think,
A little bit of that, I think,
a
would
little
be
bit of
good.
stupid to be brave with, I think, and, they tried for decades to remove this plant. So who is smarter, the plants or humans? Because the plant manipulated us humans into propagating it through its eradication. And it's still here. Not only that, we've come out the other side and it's legal and it's being sold all over the place. Hell, I can actually go down to the local Bevmo and buy drinks now.
Whoa.
So again,
It's changing.
it's changing. Unfortunately, you're going to see the hemp bill coming in October is going to be a whiplash. A lot of the industry is shutting down because the hemp bill for the last 6 years has been a loophole for a lot of manufacturers, and they're going to close that. Our Congress has made us aware, at least through my talks. They're going to close that door in October. So you're going to see the rise and fall of the hemp industry for a little bit here domestically because it got ahead of itself, unfortunately, and did not industrialize the way that it needed to, and instead incentivized itself by just going with quick sifting and science
Right.
in labs to produce a lot of THCA and CBD drinks, which a lot of the consumer has now got a taste for, and to the alcohol industry's malcontent, they're realizing they're losing a lot of business to cannabis. So I think their influence is a lot on this particular bill so that they can potentially monopolize it, in the future, depending on, because again, they've got the distribution centers. Even myself, last year, we were carrying Pabst Blue Ribbon cannabis seltzers in my dispensaries.
I believe it.
So
They're here. Whether people want to believe it or not, big alcohol and big tobacco as well is in cannabis, and it's going to continue to happen.
Altria, they own Canadian cannabis, and who's buying up American cannabis? All the Canadian companies. So, I'm very fortunate that Berkeley Patients Group is still independent and self-owned after, and we're turning 25 years next month. We have survived 7 lawsuits in the past 21 years, and I've won every single one of them.
Congrats.
So, I'd like to thank my lawyers, but especially my lawyer, Lara DeCaro, who is one of the finest cannabis lawyers there is. She started the International Cannabis Bar Association because of the lack of education amongst counselors about cannabis, and now they're one of the leading organizations for lawyers on cannabis and cannabis reform. So I've been very fortunate to be around a lot of trendsetters. I'm very fortunate. I'm in business with Rob Connell Clark. I have a company called Bioagronomics Group. We import and export seeds and hop-laden viroid disease-free seeds that have been cleaned via Segra. So some of our genetics are available in the Segra's catalog currently. And I'm consulting various countries. We helped Ukraine with its recent medical cannabis access. In fact, while we were in Ukraine, we met with 4 different levels of the Ukrainian government seeking advice on cannabis. So, which is now medical cannabis is part of their law. So we're very proud to see that happen. We've also seen Germany come online for individual growth and use, which is huge, as we see, the retraction in, the Netherlands, as we'll see medical cannabis take hold in Spain. I think we'll see other countries seeing what is happening, because Germany is basically following what happened in Switzerland. Switzerland followed off originally with small trials. They're on their 10th trial now. They originally started with hemp. So here they are now, looking at actual distribution centers for cannabis and cannabis manufacturing. We saw just this last year, the Dutch are finally regulating and having regulated legal grows for the coffee shops. So the Czech Republic, I think, will probably push the envelope. They will stay within the confines of the international law. That international law is ratified every year at the UN in Vienna, of which that's why I'm at the Vienna in March, basically dealing and talking to countries to educate them. Some of our staunchest prohibitionists are at the UN level. Kevin Sabet and his smart approaches, who are and receive money from a lot of the prohibitionists, are there spreading lies and misinformation and mistruths about cannabis. They even assaulted one of our Veterans Action Council members this year at the UN and caused a minor international incident, of which they lied and said that they didn't do anything. And of course, they're full of it. So I don't know what about them and their lies it's them triggered when people confront them with truth. But that's one of the reasons why we also do side events, because those are ways, because just so you're aware, people who are listening, countries like Russia and China and Pakistan and other countries do still execute people for cannabis. And they use this gentleman's talking points specifically for executing and maintaining these sort of talks. So we've been utilizing our time at the UN to counter his misinformation by giving real information and giving tool points, thanks to our friend Kenzie Ribolet and Michael Crowitz and others that have been engaging at the international level and at the UN for many years. Our friends Myrtle in South Africa in Fields of Green for All, that's who I represented this year at the United Nations. I was very proud to, as they just allowed for the same thing along the lines of what just happened in Germany, allowing for personal growth and use.
That's right.
They will, again, nobody wants to breach the international law. So that's why a lot of these countries are taking small, short steps to make sure they aren't crossing that line. Why? It's because of Thailand. I have inadvertently been an advisory to Thailand because they inadvertently opened their doors. And when they open their doors, they let anyone in. And unfortunately, that allowed triads, mafias, and others to unfortunately flood in and suck up the airspace. So we were contacted by a high colonel in the Thai military that and notified that they were going to do what they are currently doing, which is shutting down the cannabis market currently as it is and just allowing for medical. Now, what this is to clean out the bad actors, and what they're then going to do is then going to open up their borders again, but they're going to be much more stringent in what they're and how they're going to achieve that goal, and that will be up to the Thai people. The problem is the Thai people are a very proud people. They love their country and they take pride in it, and unfortunately, these bad actors have allowed tourists to smoke in areas and in places where they shouldn't and do things that they shouldn't do, and they have offended the Thai people. And by doing so, they take that culturally seriously. So if you're watching this, you're in Thailand, you're doing something illegal, I would highly recommend you getting out of there, because I've hear they're going to be using some very heavy-handed situations to deal with that and to go through the proper channels. If not, your life could be on the line.
You heard it here first. New countries opening up all around the world. Thailand, Germany, South America, even the US. Everything's changing, and I appreciate your time teaching us about these different changes. This has been a wonderful interview, Etienne. I'm super grateful that you've been mentoring me and now the rest of the Grow World community. So thank you for your time.
It's an honor and a pleasure. And to the growers out there, keep on doing the noble work. Push the envelope, embrace the science, and see what is possible, because through new technologies, CRISPR technology, and new sciences, on top of now real science working alongside cannabis, we're at the threshold of a new dawn for this plant outright, and I look forward to your years of documenting it. So keep up the great work. I'm glad to see you rise from your cocoon and shine, and that the world gets to see the quality content in cannabis that needs to be. You're one of the few that elevate cannabis to a level it should be represented and presented at.
Thank you.
We used to dream of that, and you're encompassing it. So, I would be a fool not to mentor, to make sure and help steward along and make sure that the integrity of the growers and this plant are maintained throughout. So, thank you. Thank you, Grow World.
Thank you so much for listening to the Grow World podcast. Don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. Until next time.